One of the reasons betrayal can eventually become a narcissist's deepest regret is that sometimes without realizing it, they end up betraying the one person who truly saw them. The persona they carefully constructed for the world, but the more complicated human being behind it. Narcissistic personalities are often surrounded by people who interact with them in predictable ways. Some admire them from a distance, drawn to confidence, charm, or success. Others tolerate them cautiously, avoiding confrontation to maintain peace. In many relationships, the narcissist remains largely unchallenged because people engage only with the surface they present, and that surface is usually carefully managed. The narcissistic personality often develops a kind of psychological armor, an identity built around strength, control, independence, or superiority. Beneath that armor, however, there is frequently a much more fragile emotional landscape. Many psychologists have noted that narcissism is often less about excessive self-love and more about the defense against deep insecurity. The grandiosity, the need for admiration, the avoidance of vulnerability, these can function as ways of protecting a wounded sense of self. Most people never get close enough to see that complexity. They interact with the mask. Occasionally, however, a different kind of person enters the narcissist's life, someone who is not only perceptive but emotionally curious, someone who doesn't simply react to the outward behavior, but senses the inner contradictions beneath it. These individuals, often empathetic, reflective, and patient, have a unique ability to see both the strength and the struggle in another person. They notice the moments when confidence turns into defensiveness. They see the flashes of vulnerability that appear when the mask slips for a second. And instead of rejecting the narcissist for those imperfections, they often try to understand them. This kind of understanding is rare. The empath, or emotionally aware partner, often gives the narcissist something they rarely experience: the feeling of being seen without immediate judgment. Instead of simply admiring the surface or resisting it, they attempt to connect with the deeper human being beneath it. But here is where the tragedy often begins. Because the narcissistic personality, built around defense and self-protection, does not always know how to receive that kind of insight. Being deeply seen can feel threatening. It exposes vulnerabilities that the narcissist has spent years trying to hide, sometimes even from themselves. So when tension arises in the relationship, and it almost always does, the narcissist may respond with the strategies they know best: distancing, manipulation, blame, or betrayal. In that moment, the empath becomes just another person to push away, overpower, or replace. At least, that is how it appears at first. What the narcissist often fails to recognize in the moment is that the person they are discarding was not like the others. This was not someone who simply admired them or feared them. This was someone who actually understood them. And that kind of understanding is difficult to replicate. Later, when the relationship ends and time creates distance, something uncomfortable can begin to surface. The narcissist may encounter many other people who flatter them, people who challenge them, people who challenge them, people who orbit around their charisma or success, but very few of those people truly see them. The conversations remain superficial. The emotional connection feels thinner. Something about the dynamic feels incomplete, though they may struggle to articulate why. And slowly, sometimes years later, the realization begins to form. The person they betrayed was not just another relationship. It was one of the few relationships where they were actually understood. And that is a rare thing to lose. Because admiration can be replaced, attention can be replaced, even attraction can be replaced, But being truly seen by another human being is far more uncommon. And the quiet truth many narcissists eventually confront is this: the greatest loss in their life was not the person who left. It was the person who understood them and whom they chose to betray. Another reason betrayal can eventually become a narcissist's greatest regret is that they lose something they rarely recognize while the relationship is still intact: emotional stability. Too very often, the person they betray was quietly holding together more of their internal world than they ever realized. Many narcissistic personalities live with a great deal of inner turbulence. On the surface, they may appear confident, decisive, even dominant. But beneath that outward structure Their emotional landscape can be surprisingly unstable. Feelings of insecurity, shame, or inadequacy often sit just below the surface. And because these emotions are difficult to face directly, they are usually managed indirectly through control, admiration, achievement, or constant validation from others. What keeps this internal system functioning is often not the narcissist alone. Very frequently, there is another person in the relationship who becomes an emotional stabilizer, someone who absorbs tension, diffuses conflict, and offers reassurance when the narcissist's internal balance begins to waver. This person listens during emotional storms, explains misunderstandings, and repeatedly tries to bring the relationship back to equilibrium. In psychological terms, this is sometimes called emotional regulation by proxy. Instead of learning to process difficult feelings internally, the narcissist unconsciously relies on another person to help manage them. The empath becomes the emotional anchor in the relationship. When the narcissist becomes angry, the empath calms the situation. When the narcissist feels misunderstood, the empath tries to interpret and clarify. When insecurity surfaces, the empath reassures and validates. Over time, this pattern becomes so familiar that the narcissist barely notices it happening. It simply feels like the natural dynamic of the relationship. But what often goes unrecognized is the immense emotional labor involved in maintaining that balance. The empath invests energy into understanding moods, anticipating reactions, and smoothing over emotional disruptions. They become highly attuned to the narcissist's internal state, sometimes even before the narcissist is aware of it themselves. And in many cases, they do this out of genuine care. They believe that patience, understanding, and empathy can help the relationship grow healthier. They believe that if they remain steady enough, the narcissist may eventually feel safe enough to become more open and self-aware. But when betrayal enters the picture, whether through dishonesty, manipulation, or emotional abandonment, that stabilizing presence disappears. Suddenly, the narcissist is left without the person who quietly absorbed so much of their emotional volatility. At first, they may attempt to replace the dynamic quickly. They may seek out new relationships, new admiration, new sources of validation. On the surface, life continues as if nothing essential has changed. But something subtle begins to shift. Without the empath's stabilizing influence, emotional fluctuations may become more noticeable. Conflicts escalate more easily in new relationships. Misunderstandings linger longer. The quiet sense of grounding that once existed is no longer there. And the narcissist may find themselves reacting more strongly to situations that previously felt manageable. This is often when the deeper realization begins to form. The person they betrayed was not simply a partner or companion. That person played a vital role in maintaining emotional equilibrium. They were the one who softened difficult moments, translated feelings into understanding, and brought calm where chaos might otherwise have taken over. In their absence, the narcissist begins to encounter their own emotional landscape without that external support. And that experience can be unsettling, because the stability they once assumed was part of their own strength may have actually been the result of someone else's quiet emotional labor. By the time this insight begins to surface, the relationship is often long gone. The empath has moved forward, learning to invest their emotional intelligence in environments where it is reciprocated rather than consumed. And the narcissist is left with a realization that arrives far too late. They did not simply lose a relationship. They lost the person who made their inner world more stable than it had ever been on its own. And the quiet truth that follows is difficult to escape. The person who held your chaos together is often the very person you regret losing the most. Another layer to why betraying the wrong person becomes a narcissist's greatest regret lies in the disruption of their carefully constructed self-image. Narcissists are experts at maintaining an internal narrative in which they are always competent, admired, and in control. This self-image is not merely vanity. It is a psychological necessity. Behind it lies a fragile core, a deep vulnerability that cannot withstand exposure or failure. Every relationship, every social interaction, every alliance functions as a mirror, reflecting back to them the version of themselves they wish to believe in. When they betray someone who sees them deeply, someone who knows their patterns, their vulnerabilities, and their contradictions, that mirror shatters. The person they betray may not only see through the facades, but also silently hold the narcissist accountable in subtle, non-confrontational ways. A perceptive partner, or empathoft, often recognizes the inconsistencies between the narcissist's words and actions, the gaps between their public persona and private reality. This recognition doesn't always manifest as criticism. In fact, it can be as simple as a calm refusal to indulge certain manipulations, a quiet emotional boundary, or a steadfast alignment with truth over appeasement. The narcissist, accustomed to admiration, envy, or compliance, is confronted with a form of unacknowledged honesty that destabilizes their sense of omnipotence. When betrayal occurs, the narcissist experiences an abrupt fracture of their self-image, their internal narrative. The story they tell themselves about being in control, being superior, being untouchable, is suddenly challenged by reality. They cannot rely on the person they betrayed to smooth over inconsistencies or validate their inflated identity. The person who previously served as both confidant and witness to their carefully curated persona is now gone, and with them goes the subtle reinforcement that had allowed the narcissist to maintain their inner equilibrium. This loss is more profound than a typical breakup or the end of a relationship. It is existential, affecting the narcissist's very sense of self. Without the empath or insightful partner who quietly mirrored both their strengths and their weaknesses, the narcissist is forced to confront an unflattering truth. They are fallible, they are imperfect, and their self-image has been partially dependent on someone they failed to honor. The weight of this realization can be suffocating because it is one thing to feel temporarily frustrated or rejected, and another entirely to recognize that the scaffolding that propped up your self-concept has been dismantled by your own actions. In this space of recognition, regret takes root. It is not simply regret for losing a person, but for losing a mechanism that had been silently sustaining their psychological equilibrium. Tend, consciously or unconsciously, that their former partner's insight, empathy, and perceptiveness provided a stabilizing force, one that mitigated their vulnerabilities and softened the impact of their own self-deceptions. That person was a mirror of truth that they could manipulate. Yes, but also one that helped maintain the illusion of self-mastery. When that mirror disappears, so does the reinforcement of their identity, leaving a vacuum that no superficial praise, conquest, or distraction can fill. The starkness of this truth, the realization that their betrayal destroyed not only a relationship, but also a critical support for their own psychological stability, often emerges slowly, painfully, and irrevocably. By the time they comprehend it fully, the person they wronged has already moved forward, carrying with them the quiet strength and clarity the narcissist can no longer access. The narcissist is left to grapple with the fragments of a self-image that now feels unstable, hollow, and incomplete. The profound takeaway is this: when a narcissist betrays someone who both sees and supports the depth of their identity, they do not simply lose a person, they lose the reflection of themselves that they secretly relied upon. And it is in that absence, in the idea of that lost mirror, that the greatest regret silently festers. The next layer of why betraying the wrong person becomes a narcissist's greatest regret lies in the profound loss of control. For a narcissist, control is not merely a preference, it is a lifeline. Every interaction, every relationship, every alliance is carefully calibrated to sustain their dominance, to ensure that their narrative, both internal and external, remains unchallenged. But when they betray someone who possesses awareness, insight, or an emotional acuity beyond their ordinary partners, that control evaporates in ways they cannot anticipate or manage. The person they wronged becomes a silent architect of consequences, one whose actions, or even inaction, alter the narcissist's environment in subtle but irreversible ways. Unlike those who are easily manipulated, who feed the narcissist's ego without questioning it, the perceptive individual cannot be bent to reinforce falsehoods. They may choose to disengage quietly, refusing to participate in the games and illusions that once sustained the narcissist's authority. This absence is disorienting because it deprives the narcissist of the familiar feedback loops, the admiring glances, the subtle compliance, the emotional responses that allowed them to feel omnipotent. Without these, the narcissist is exposed to an unfamiliar internal landscape, one in which their influence is incomplete, their power incomplete, their strategies ineffective. They are suddenly forced to confront the reality that control is never inherent. It is relational, dependent upon the presence, perceptions, and choices of others. Moreover, the betrayal triggers a cascade of uncertainty. The narcissist expects the world to react predictably, to validate their desires, and protect their constructed self-image. When the wrong person is betrayed, reactions deviate from expectation. Boundaries are drawn, perspectives are shifted, and the narrative they have relied upon fractures. The narcissist's usual tools, manipulation, charm, intimidation, lose efficacy. To what was once a predictable environment becomes an arena of unpredictability, and unpredictability is intolerable for someone whose sense of identity is structured around dominance and certainty. Destabilization is felt deeply, not just cognitively, but emotionally and physiologically. Anxiety, frustration, and a sense of impotence emerge, highlighting the vulnerability the narcissist habitually masks with arrogance. Perhaps most insidious is that the loss of control is permanent. Unlike temporary setbacks or failures that can be managed, the consequences of betraying someone perceptive and principled cannot be fully undone. They carry forward the awareness of the narcissist's true character, often without confrontation, but with quiet, unwavering integrity. The narcissist cannot erase the memory of that awareness, nor can they recreate the environment of compliance they once relied upon. This permanence magnifies regret, turning a single act of betrayal into an enduring psychological wound. The lesson here is not merely about power dynamics. It is about the deep interdependence between self-concept and the relational world. A narcissist's authority is never absolute. It is contingent on the people around them, on their willingness to play roles that reinforce the narcissist's illusions. When they betray someone who refuses to be a passive participant, they face not just loss, but a confrontation with the limitations of their own identity. This is the crucible in which the greatest regret is forged, a recognition that their choices destroyed not only a relationship, but the very structures that maintain their perceived mastery over the world. In the end, the narcissist learns, often too late, that control is never fully theirs to command, and that betraying the wrong person can strip them of both influence and the comforting illusion of invulnerability. It is in that vacuum, where their former control has dissolved, that the shadow of regret takes root and endures, haunting them long after the moment of betrayal has passed.